Ooh, prominent men took part. There were some extremely prominent men there that day, including a Scandinavian king, 2 former presidents of the United States, and an internationally prominent evangelist. I don't know who that was. 2 other internationally prominent clergymen and a very high official of the federal government. The one who actually presented me with a certificate of the 33rd degree, deadly deception, Jim Shaw. Oh, this is interesting. Billy Graham aided Ronald Reagan. Now, we talked about this before. If you realize that communism was completely manufactured and that the Cold War was completely manufactured, and you take out fighting commies from the resume of anyone that you think is a good guy, there's not a lot left over. Ronald Reagan, big on gun control, big on illegal aliens, big on national debt, big on government. I'm not seeing an American patriot. But we're going to get into this in a little bit. You know, the Vatican is a sovereign city-state. Just like Washington, D.C., just like London. They have their own rules. Regular rules don't apply there. The Vatican has their own military, their own police, their own jail. That the United States government severed relations with the Vatican in 1867 after an investigation into who murdered Abraham Lincoln. Well, that's interesting. We'll get into that a little bit more a little later. Who reopened the doors? Why, it was Patriot Ronald Wilson Reagan at the bidding of Billy Graham. Well, what was going on there? A spokesman for Billy Graham confirmed that the evangelist played a behind-the-scenes role in President Reagan's decision to establish formal diplomatic relations, re-establish formal diplomatic relations with the Vatican, a newspaper reported Tuesday. Boy, this is awful hard to find. I'm glad I was able to get this for you. Early in 1983, Graham was asked by the president and advisor, William Clark, to make an informal private inquiry among evangelical Protestant leaders about likely responses to such an action, said Donald Biley, media director for the Billy Graham Evangelist Association in Minneapolis. Quote, a number of leaders were consulted with the understanding their remarks would be confidential and would not be made public by Dr. Graham. A summary of their views was provided by Mr. Clark. A copy of the 7-page letter that the Baptist evangelist sent to Clark was obtained by the Chicago Sun-Times. Quoted Graham as saying, if anyone can get away with this, Mr. Reagan can. Really? Evangelical leaders contacted by Graham at the request of Clark included the Reverend Jerry Falwell, head of the Moral Majority, the Reverend Pat Robertson, head of Christian Broadcasting Network, the Reverend Billy Marvin, Executive Secretary of the National Association of Evangelicals, David Hubbard, President of Fuller Theological Seminary, and Gilbert Beers, editor of Christianity Today magazine. Generally, moderate evangelicals were described by Graham as presenting few problems, especially if the point were made that the Pope was being recognized as a political head and not in the religious capacity. Who was this guy working for? I honestly don't know what I would personally recommend to the President. Graham concluded his letter, but he said that the President would, quote, need to cover his political bases and bring into the picture, quote, people who might cause him trouble. Do you see a pro-Vatican conspiracy between Billy Graham and Ronald Reagan on this? I sure do. So George Washington wasn't practicing, huh? Well, what did other people think of George Washington? That's pretty creepy.